rebound that shook the NBA, one meaningless rebound with 1 second left, may now be the moment that makes the entire NBA look over its shoulder. Because when fans watch Malik Beasley sprint across the floor in garbage time, most people saw effort. They saw hustle. They saw a player finishing the possession, even though the game was already decided. But according to the allegations now surrounding him, that rebound may not have been about basketball at all. It may have been about money, debt, pressure, and a betting line that only a few people truly understood in real time. And that is why this story is bigger than Malik Beasley. This is not just another NBA scandal. This is not just a player making a bad decision away from the court. This is a federal case that has pushed one of the league's darkest fears into the spotlight. What happens when the smallest numbers in a box score become valuable enough to manipulate? Points, rebounds, assists, minutes played, a player leaving a game early, a player passing up a shot, a player grabbing one extra board when the score no longer matters. In the old NBA, those moments were easy to ignore. In today's NBA betting world, those moments can be worth tens of thousands of dollars. And now, Beasley is at the center of a storm that could shake players, agents, coaches, front offices, and even the league office itself. According to the allegations discussed in the case, Beasley was tied to a scheme involving prop bets, inside information, and manipulated individual performance. The accusation is not that an entire game was thrown. That is what makes this even more dangerous. The final score could look normal, the team could still win, the fans could still leave thinking they watched a clean basketball game, but underneath the surface, one rebound, one shot attempt, or one quiet stat line could tell a different story. That is the nightmare for the NBA, because basketball depends on trust. Fans trust that players are competing honestly. Coaches trust that effort is real. Teammates trust that every possession matters. Sportsbooks trust that the numbers are unpredictable. But once people start wondering whether a player's stat line was influenced by money outside the game, the damage spreads fast. And Beasley's story is painful because on the court, he was not some forgotten name. He was coming off one of the strongest shooting seasons of his career. He had rebuilt his value. He had become a real weapon from three-point range. Detroit looked like a place where he could restart his career and possibly secure another major contract. Then everything changed. Instead of talking about his shooting, the league is now talking about federal charges. Instead of talking about his future, people are asking how deep the investigation goes. Instead of celebrating a player who found his rhythm, the NBA is watching another name become part of a much bigger gambling crisis. And here is the scariest part. Beasley may not be the end of the story. Other names have already been pulled into the larger conversation around NBA betting scandals. Jonte Porter became a warning sign. Terry Rozier became another headline. Damon Jones became part of the wider picture. Chauncey Billups brought even more attention to the scale of the investigation. Suddenly, this no longer feels like one isolated case. It feels like a door is opened, and nobody inside the league knows exactly who might be standing behind it. That is why players are nervous. That is why agents are paying attention. That is why executives cannot just brush this off as one man's mistake. Because if federal investigators have been tracking suspicious betting patterns for years, then the biggest question is not what they already found. The biggest question is what they have not revealed yet. And for the NBA, that question is dangerous. So before we go deeper into the debts, the alleged scheme, the prop bets, the courtroom pressure, and the rebound that may follow Beasley forever, I want to know where you are watching from. Drop your city or country in the comments right now. If you think this scandal could change the NBA forever, press 1. If you think the league will survive it like every other controversy, press 2. And if you want more NBA stories like this, make sure you subscribe because this case is only getting darker from here. Malik Beasley's career collapsed overnight. Before this scandal, Malik Beasley looked like a player who had finally found his basketball home. Detroit gave him space. Detroit gave him minutes. Detroit gave him a role that made sense. And for a while, it looked like Beasley had turned himself into one of the most dangerous shooters in the league. He was not just hitting threes. He was changing games with them. He was stretching defenses, punishing mistakes, and giving the Pistons the kind of floor spacing every young team dreams about. That is what makes the fall so shocking, because this was not a player fading quietly out of the league. This was not a veteran at the end of the bench trying to hold on to a roster spot. Beasley was productive. He was valuable. He was coming off the kind of season that should have brought security, respect, and maybe even a major payday. Instead, the story turned darker. A possible contract disappeared. Teams backed away. The conversation around him shifted from shooting percentages and roster fit to federal charges and gambling allegations. In the NBA, reputation can change fast, But this was different. This was not a bad playoff series. This was not a locker room issue. This was the kind of accusation that makes every front office stop, freeze, and ask whether basketball value is even worth the risk. And for Beasley, the timing could not have been worse. He had spent years moving from team to team, trying to prove he belonged. Denver drafted him, Minnesota gave him a bigger stage, other stops followed, but Detroit felt like the place where his career could breathe again. He was playing with confidence. He was shooting at an elite level. He looked like a player who had rebuilt his market. Then the investigation swallowed everything. That is the cruel part of this story. Beasley's best basketball may now be remembered next to the worst allegations of his life. The season that should have helped him secure his future became the season people now look back at with uncomfortable question. Every hot shooting night, every stat line, every unusual moment suddenly gets viewed through a different lens. That is what a gambling scandal does. It does not just damage the future, it rewrites the past. And once fans start asking whether the numbers were real, the league has a problem that no highlight reel can fix. The debt that changed everything. To understand how a player with NBA money could end up in a situation this dangerous, you have to understand the pressure behind the scenes. The public sees the salary, the public sees the cars, the arenas, the cameras, and the lifestyle. But what people do not always see is the other side of professional sports. Bad habits, financial pressure, trusted people becoming dangerous, and debts that can quietly grow until they control every decision a person makes. That is where Ed Davis enters the story. Davis was not a random stranger from outside basketball. He was a former NBA player. He knew the locker room culture. He understood the travel, the schedule, the money, the habits, and the emotional world players live in. That made his relationship with Beasley more complicated. This was not just a better reaching out to a player. This was someone from inside the NBA ecosystem. And according to the allegations, debt became the key. Beasley reportedly owed serious money. Not small money, not the kind of amount a player can ignore and move past. The kind of money that follows you, weighs on you, and changes the way you look at every opportunity. When debt becomes large enough, it stops being a number. It becomes pressure, it becomes fear, it becomes leverage. That is the dangerous part, because once someone else controls your debt, they may begin to control your choices. And if that person also understands betting markets, player props, and how valuable inside information can be, the situation can turn toxic very quickly. The alleged arrangement was not simply about handing over cash. It was about debt relief. A debt gets reduced, a payment gets forgiven, a financial burden gets lighter. On paper, that can be harder to see than a direct payment. But emotionally, for someone drowning in gambling losses, that kind of relief can feel just as powerful as money. And that is where the trap closes. A player does not wake up one morning planning to risk everything. Usually, the road is slower than that. One bad bet becomes another, one loan becomes another, one private conversation becomes a proposal. Then suddenly, a player is not just thinking about basketball anymore. He is thinking about how many rebounds he needs, how many points he should avoid, and who is waiting for the result. That is not freedom. That is control. How prop bets became the perfect trap. The most frightening part of this alleged scheme is how simple it could be. You do not need to change the final score. You do not need to convince an entire team to lose. You do not need every player on the court to be involved. In the modern betting world, one player can create chaos by influencing one small number. That is why prop bets are so dangerous. A prop bet is not about who wins the game. It is about whether one player reaches a certain stat line. Points, rebounds, assists, three-pointers, steals, blocks, minutes. Sometimes the difference between winning and losing a bet is one rebound, one missed shot, or one early trip to the locker room. That makes the system vulnerable because the player is the person closest to the number. He knows how his body feels. He knows if he plans to be aggressive. He knows if he is going to avoid shots. He knows if he might chase rebounds or let them go. And if that information reaches people outside the game before the sportsbook adjusts, it becomes extremely valuable. That is the accusation at the heart of this story. Beasley allegedly provided information about how he intended to perform in certain categories. From there, others could place bets based on knowledge the public did not have. The fans did not know, the opposing team did not know, the sportsbooks did not know, but the people inside the alleged circle did. That is why this is not just a gambling story, it is an integrity story. Because basketball is built on uncertainty. Nobody is supposed to know what a player will do before the ball is tipped. Nobody is supposed to have a private script for a public game. The drama of sports comes from the fact that the outcome is unknown, but prop bet manipulation changes that. It creates a hidden game inside the real game. The scoreboard may say one thing, but the real money may be moving somewhere else. A player can win with his team and still make a corrupt bet cash. A team can celebrate a victory while a federal investigation is quietly tracking the numbers behind it. That is what makes this scandal so hard for the NBA to contain. Because if people stop trusting the box score, they stop trusting the game. The 1-second rebound, the moment that makes this entire case feel almost unreal, came near the end of a game that was already decided. The Bucks were ahead. The clock was almost gone. The outcome was not in doubt. For most players, that is the time when the possession fades into nothing. The shot goes up, the horn sounds, everyone walks away, and nobody remembers the final rebound. But this time, according to the allegations, that final rebound mattered. Beasley reportedly chased it with 1 second left, moving past multiple players to grab the ball as the game ended. To a casual viewer, it looked like effort, maybe even good habits. Coaches always tell players to finish possessions. Fans love hustle, teammates respect it. But inside the alleged betting scheme, that rebound may have meant something completely different. It may have been the difference between a winning bet and a losing bet. That is why the image sticks. A player sprinting in a game that no longer needed saving. A rebound that meant nothing to the standings, nothing to the scoreboard, and nothing to the final result. But to the people watching a prop line, it may have meant everything. That is the kind of detail that keeps audiences locked in, because it forces people to rethink what they saw. Was it hustle or was it pressure? Was it instinct or was it obligation? Was it basketball or was it something hiding behind basketball? The most disturbing part is how normal it looked. That is what makes prop bet manipulation so difficult to detect. A player grabbing a rebound is not suspicious by itself. A player taking fewer shots can be explained by defense. A player having fewer assists can be blamed on teammates missing. A player leaving early can be called injury management. Every small statistical outcome has a believable basketball explanation. And that is exactly why the system can be exploited. In a league where every possession is tracked, clipped, analyzed, and monetized, even the smallest action can carry financial weight. The NBA has built a product where every stat matters. Sports betting took that reality and turned it into a market. Now the league has to face the consequences, because from this point forward, every strange rebound, every late game stat chase, every unexpected underperformance may leave fans wondering the same thing. Was that just basketball, or was somebody getting paid? Beasley was not the first warning sign. The NBA already had a warning before Malik Beasley became the center of this storm. That warning was Jontay Porter. Porter was not a superstar. He was not one of the faces of the league. He was not someone casual fans built their nightly schedule around. But his case became one of the loudest alarms the NBA had heard in years because it showed exactly how vulnerable player prop betting could be. Porter was accused of sharing private information and limiting his own participation for betting purposes. The league responded with one of the harshest punishments possible: a lifetime ban. That was supposed to send a message to every player, every agent, every trainer, every friend, and every person near an NBA locker room. But the message may not have been enough, because after Porter, more names entered the conversation. Terry Rozier, Damon Jones, Chauncey Billups. Different cases, different allegations, different roles. But together, they created a picture that was impossible for the league to ignore. This was not just one player making one reckless decision. It looked like a larger gambling ecosystem had grown around the NBA. Damon Jones became especially important because of his connections. He had been a player. He had been around teams. He knew people, and people knew him. When someone like that becomes connected to betting investigations, the concern is not just what he did. The concern is what he knows. That is why cooperation in a federal case matters. When one person starts talking, the investigation can expand. Text messages get reviewed. Betting records get traced. Names get matched to transactions. Conversations that once felt private suddenly become evident. And people who thought they were far from the center of the case may discover they were closer than they realized. That is what creates fear inside a league. Not just guilt, fear. Fear that an old message could resurface. Fear that a friend placed a suspicious bet. Fear that an agent knew too much. Fear that a former teammate is now cooperating. Fear that the federal government has been watching longer than anyone expected. The NBA can handle controversy. It has survived scandals before. But gambling is different, because gambling attacks the one thing sports cannot survive without: the belief that what fans are watching is real. Why the entire league is nervous. Inside the NBA, the fear is not only about Malik Beasley. The fear is about how many people may be connected to the same world. Players talk, agents talk, former teammates stay in touch, trainers hear things, family members know injuries before the public does. Friends know when a player is frustrated, tired, hurt, distracted, or planning to play limited minutes. In the modern betting market, all of that information has value. That is the scary part. The NBA is full of private information. Every team has it. Every player carries it. Every locker room protects it. A sore ankle, a minutes restriction, a personal issue, a matchup plan, a coach's rotation decision. Normally, those details are just part of competitive basketball. But in a betting world, those same details can become currency. That is why agents are watching this closely. An agent is supposed to protect a player's career. He knows contracts, injuries, team relationships, and sometimes even personal problems. That access requires trust. But when an agent's name appears in a betting-related case, it creates a chilling question. Who around the players can really be trusted? The league depends on relationships. Players trust agents. Teams trust medical staff. Coaches trust players. Fans trust the league. Sportsbooks trust that the games are not being manipulated. But a gambling scandal cuts through all of those relationships at once. And the federal government does not operate like the NBA. The league can investigate. The league can interview. The league can suspend. But federal investigators can dig deeper. They can follow money. They can subpoena records. They can build a case quietly for months or years before the public hears anything. That is why this situation feels different. If the investigation started years ago, then people inside the league are asking a terrifying question: what else do they already know? That uncertainty is powerful. It changes behavior. It makes people review old conversations. It makes front offices rethink who they bring into their building. It makes players more careful about who they trust, what they say, and who they allow near their inner circle. And for a league built on star power, access, and constant media attention, that creates a major problem. Because once suspicion enters the room, it does not leave quietly. It sits there. It waits. And every new headline gives it more oxygen. The NBA's prop bet problem. The NBA now has to face a problem it helped create. For years, legal sports betting was treated like the future of fan engagement. It made every regular season game feel bigger. Fans were no longer just watching who won or lost. They were watching points, rebounds, assists, threes, minutes, and even tiny late game moments that used to mean nothing. But that is exactly where the danger begins. Old school game fixing was hard. You had to change the final score, influence multiple people, or affect the entire outcome. Prop bets are different. They are smaller, quieter, and much easier to hide. A player does not need to make his team lose. He only needs to affect one number. One fewer rebound, one missed shot, one early exit, one stat line that lands just under the betting line. That is why this scandal is so dangerous for the league. The scoreboard can look clean while something else is happening underneath. The fans may think they watched a normal game, but a small statistical detail could have been worth serious money to people with inside information. This puts the NBA in a difficult position. The league embraced betting because it brought attention, money, and constant engagement. But now it has to ask whether certain prop bets are too risky to allow without stronger monitoring. Should sportsbooks offer lines on every role player? Should injury information be protected more tightly? Should the NBA limit some player props? Should suspicious betting movement trigger faster investigation? These questions are no longer theoretical. Because if fans begin to doubt the honesty of small moments, they may start doubting the entire product. And that is the one thing the NBA cannot afford. The league can survive bad games. It can survive drama. It can survive trades, injuries, and controversy. But if fans stop believing the numbers are real, the damage becomes much harder to repair. Beasley's future and the NBA's next move. For Malik Beasley, the road back to the NBA now looks extremely difficult. Before the allegations, teams could still make a basketball case for him. He could shoot. He could space the floor. He could help a playoff team off the bench. In a league built around three-point shooting, that kind of skill always has value. But federal charges change everything. No front office wants that kind of risk attached to its roster. Even if a team likes his talent, the questions are too heavy. What happens if more evidence comes out? What happens if the legal case drags on? What happens if the league adds its own punishment? What happens if the signing becomes a distraction? That is why time is working against him. Beasley is no longer a young prospect with years to rebuild. Every month away from NBA basketball makes the comeback harder. Teams move on. Younger shooters arrive. Rosters change. And in the NBA, once your reputation becomes more dangerous than your production, the phone stops ringing. But this is bigger than Beasley. The NBA now has to prove it can protect the game in a betting era. That means stronger monitoring, better education, clearer rules, and maybe even changes to player prop betting. The league also has to admit that internal investigations may not be enough when federal authorities are uncovering things the NBA missed. That is a serious problem. If the league reacts too softly, people will say it cares more about betting money than integrity. If it reacts too harshly, players in the union may push back over fairness and due process. But doing nothing is not an option, because every unanswered scandal makes the next one more damaging. The NBA does not just need to punish the guilty. It needs to restore trust before fans start questioning every strange stat line they see. The lesson the NBA cannot ignore: the Malik Beasley story is not just about one player, one rebound, or one indictment. It is a warning about what happens when money, pressure, debt, access, and sports betting collide inside the same league. A career that took years to build can fall apart quickly when trust disappears. Beasley should have been remembered for shooting. He should have been remembered as a player who found a role, rebuilt his value, and became one of the league's most dangerous three-point threats. Instead, his name is now tied to allegations that may follow him forever. That is the human side of this story. A player can spend his whole life earning a place in the NBA. Early mornings, injuries, criticism, travel, pressure, thousands of shots in empty gyms. But one dangerous pattern, one bad relationship, or one reckless decision can put everything at risk, and the NBA has to learn from it. The answer cannot only be punishment. The league needs stronger education, better support systems, tighter rules, and real protection for players who may be dealing with gambling problems or financial pressure behind the scenes. Because gambling addiction is real, debt is real, bad influences are real, and young athletes with money, fame, and pressure around them can become targets if nobody is watching closely enough. The game has to remain bigger than the bet. Fans should be able to watch a player chase a rebound and believe it is effort. They should be able to see a player leave a game and believe it is injury related. They should be able to read a box score and believe it came from honest competition. That trust is sacred. Without trust, the contract means less, the jersey means less, the stats mean less, the game itself means less. So the lesson is simple. Talent can make you famous, money can make you comfortable, but integrity is what keeps everything standing. If you think the NBA needs stronger action against gambling threats, comment 1. If you think the league can fix this without changing prop bets, comment 2. Like this video, share it with another NBA fan, and subscribe for more deep NBA stories, because this investigation may still have another shocking chapter ahead.